Hello, and welcome back to Rails Quest. We got a real fast, quick tip for you today. It's about another gem that I'd like to spotlight, and it is called Good Migrations. This gem will help you prevent a whole class of sneaky issues that can creep into your Rails database migrations so that you can worry about managing your database schema and not wrestling strange errors or inconsistencies in your database files. You can read a little bit more about this because they've got a great write-up in the README. But briefly, one of the big benefits of this gem is that it keeps your historical Rails migrations nice and clean so that you can rerun them whenever you want. The short reason, I know some people come to me asking, why would you want to run old migrations? They've already served their purpose. And for one thing, I would say, if that's the case, then why do we keep them around at all? And I can explain why. So let's back up a little bit. When you create migration and run it, Rails is going to dump the schema at its current state after that point into a file called schema.rb. I think we can take a look at some code now. So here's an example schema.rb. You can see it has a version at the top, and that corresponds to the latest migration that you've run. And then you've got all the create table definitions and indexes and all the other good stuff that you need for your schema. So why isn't it sufficient, since it's all here, to just use the schema.rb file? Because you could run something like Rails DB schema load here, and you can load the schema from this file. The reason is because, and I've seen it all too many times before, corruption can creep into this file. Mistakes happen. Everybody does it. I'm sure I've done it myself. I've seen it as recently as in the last few weeks at clients in clients' code bases. It's nothing new. It's just something that happens when you've got a file that is reliant on the state of things, the state of the database. You might tweak something and forget that you did that in a migration. The migration runs in production and it creates the database one way, and that does not match the schema.rb because you forgot to check it in. And that's just one example of a way that this file can get out of sync. So what do you do when that happens? The easiest solution is to drop your database, your development database, maybe back up whatever development data that you're working with if it's going to slow you down to have to build that up again. Drop it and then run the migrations again. So what that's going to look like is, for example, db drop, db create, db migrate, and that will run all your migrations from the beginning of time. Once you've done that, if it succeeds, you'll end up with a pristine database schema.rb file that accurately represents your database from that point forward. And then you can use schema load until such a time as you might need to run your migrations again. So what are some things that can make your database migrations break over time? And what are some ways you can mitigate that and ensure that they will never break? That's where the Good Migrations gem comes in. You can use just your discipline and knowledge of what to do, the right steps to take to do this without the gem. But the gem is a helpful reminder, especially if you've got a lot of people on your team or you might experience some growth or changes in your team. This helps keep everyone going in the same direction because, as you'll see, some of the things this gem prevents are actually patterns that I've seen. It's not recommended, but I've seen it. It's very common out there in the community. So it could be a tough habit to break for a team, especially when you're bringing in new people who may not be aware of this problem. So README has a lot of great info. I'm not going to regurgitate it all here. I encourage you to look at that when you get the chance. We're going to take a look at this example migration that I've created just to illustrate the kind of code that is a problem. And like I've said, I've seen this quite frequently in the past. And there are just other ways to do this that are much less likely to bite you in the future. So you can see I've got this commented out because I don't want to actually change my database right now. But say we want to add a column to the voices table, and instead of what we're doing here in this migration is we've got voices that have many voice examples. And this migration is actually reversing the has many and compressing everything onto the root record instead of having multiple records. To do that, it might be natural to think that we should add something like this. Voice find each. So we're getting all the voices and we're updating the voice by joining all of the voice examples together. And then once we've done that, we're free to drop the voice examples table. The problem here arises when at some point in the future, or actually at some point in the past, here's what's going to happen. As soon as we run this migration and we drop the voice examples table, and presumably we would also delete the voice example model itself, which in turn would mean we would delete the has many voice examples. As soon as we come back here to run this migration, we don't have the voice examples anymore. So if we wanted to rebuild our schema from scratch because we found some inconsistencies, we would be sunk at this point because, oh, this database migration relies on some things being there in the application code, but the application code has changed. So the basic rule of thumb to keep in mind, anything we put in the database migration needs to be immutable forever. And application code is definitely not immutable. We're changing it all the time, adding features, taking away features, refactoring things, and you're never running this database code until you're in a bind. Your database migrations just sit there, most likely not run. There's no test suite hitting them unless you have it set up that way on purpose. And so this kind of issue can be very sneaky. It can strike at a bad moment because you're already in emergency mode trying to fix your schema.rb or whatever's going on there. So that just adds stress to an already stressful situation. If you've worked with development, especially web development in any capacity for very long, you've most likely had a stressful moment with your users' data or your production data, because it's stressful dealing with someone's data. It's their stuff. You feel like you want to do right by your customer and you don't want to delete something by accident. You want to be very careful. So let's not make that stressful. Let's keep it as simple as we possibly can. And so what you would want to do is not put this here. You might make a migration that adds the column, and then you'll have a separate job, either depending on the sophistication of your DevOps situation, you might just run this command in the Rails console, or it might go all the way to having a nice robust background job that's designed to run these kinds of data migrations that happen as a point in time. They're moving data from one place to another. They're transitioning from one schema to another rather than actually modifying the schema. There's a little bit of a semantic difference there between migrating data, moving it around, and migrating a schema, which is just changing the schema, not necessarily moving data around. So this way you would end up with two migrations at least, one that makes the change that you want to make, and then you find your preferred method of running the code that copies the data to the right places or changes the structure of the data. Then you are free to drop the table. So that's a little bit of what you do instead. Other ways to do this, if it really is simpler to just have the data copying code built into your migration, you can also create the records that you need right in here. So this might actually have enough now to do what you need to do. Your voice has many voice examples. You might need to add something like this as well. And now you've got an immutable version that represents the database at this point in time. And you know this will never change because it's embedded into your migration. So these are just some alternatives, solutions to think of. I'm going to comment this out for now. And we are going to demonstrate good migrations, the moment we've all been waiting for. So right now, I've got everything commented out of this migration, so it's just an empty migration. Let's run railsdb migrate and see what happens. So we've migrated successfully. No big deal there. I don't expect anything to change except the timestamp of the migration. Now we're going to use the redo command, and I'll show you we have good migrations installed. We're going to go ahead and add that column. We have a place to actually stick this stuff. And we're going to comment out the good migrations gem to show you what our migration does. Okay, so we've added that column and it runs just fine when we have the good migrations gem disabled. But what happens when we have the good migrations gem enabled? When we have good migrations enabled, it gives us a helpful error message and it tells us exactly what's going on. Rails attempted to load the voice model, and sure enough, you can see that here. And it tells you exactly where you can find out why this is a bad thing. It explains how you can redefine the class, so it gives you another option, and it also prints out the offending migration. It's very helpful if you're a new person just joining the team. It's not just going to error with some vague message. It's going to actually give you a little bit of an explanation about why it failed and what's going on here. So let's go ahead and take their advice, and we're going to uncomment our copied over models that are just for this migration. See what happens. Okay, as you can see, this was slightly more involved involved than the example given in the error output from the good migration, but we managed to make this work. So you have has many voice examples, and then we tell it to load our migration voice example using this. So I guess that's a little extra tip. I don't necessarily recommend going terribly deep with this method. Like I mentioned before, I lean a little bit more towards running a point in time piece of code that can go along with your code as it exists at the point in time when you're trying to copy the data over. And then you can throw away, you can delete that code once you've successfully copied your data over. And then your migrations stay even simpler than this. And your migrations stick to the job of changing your schema rather than moving data around. But that's just a rule of thumb, and you can definitely do this as well if you like. And in a way, this method is a little bit simpler because then you don't have to think about, well, how am I going to run the ETL, how am I going to run the data moving part of the code? And you'd have to come up with your own pattern for that. So that is a quick overview of pitfalls to avoid with Rails database migrations. These are the Footguns that you want to avoid, and the Good Migrations gem can help you do that, at least with this class of problems that you can run into or you may encounter. So with that said, Good Migrations is a gem that I say 2 thumbs up. I recommend just adding it anywhere. There's pretty much no reason you would want to not use this gem unless you have a historical legacy Rails database that has a lot of issues with this. In that case, you're just going to have to work with what you've got, right? And there are ways to move towards a more clean situation there, but that's going to require some effort, and that's up to you and your team to decide whether that's really a priority right now. But for greenfield applications, no reservations. I say blindly add it to your application and you won't worry about this class of errors anymore. Now, I will say the latest version of Good Migrations as of this recording has a little bit of a regression with version 0.3.1, 0.3.0. It actually is missing rake task that hooks in to your database migrations and activates the Good Migrations gem. So it's not going to do anything on this version. I have a pull request to fix that, and I'm hopeful that we can get that fixed very soon, and we'll get a new version out as soon as possible. In the meantime, you can see here I have a workaround. If you just install it from the GitHub repository, then you should have no problems. And you can probably use an older version of the gem as well, but your mileage may vary there because the changes they made may have been due to some compatibility issues with various versions of Rails or Ruby. So that's just something to keep in mind. I don't expect this to be a problem in the future. This has been a reliable set and forget tool in the past, and I expect it to be well into the future. We just need to get through this little hiccup with this particular version. And with that said, go check out the Good Migrations gem. Please like and subscribe the Rails Quest channel. It really helps me out. And leave a comment below if you have any questions, or you want to know more about database migrations, or you want to know less about database migrations in the future, want to hear about something more exciting to you. I want to hear it all. Give me your thoughts, and I will see you again next time. Have a blessed week.